Chad, we are interviewing Mike Coleman. I mean, this is the big leagues now. Maybe it's like everything we have done has been preparing us for this one. This is a guy who's had some major influence on Christian music, especially in the era of 80s into 90s. I have so many questions, so many thoughts, and I've never met Michael in person. This is going to be a chance
Okay.
to talk to him in person. So I'm
Awesome.
really looking forward to this. How about you? What's been your experience with Mike?
Yeah, it's been a bit. We interviewed Mike for the docu series, so
Mm-hmm.
that will be showing up in a future episode of
Yeah.
90s Worship Night docu series. But
Yeah.
Mike's just been fantastic. He's been such a instrumental part of a lot of the connections that we've been able to make and interviews that we've been able to get,
Yeah.
with the docu series, and it's also, just been a fountain of wisdom and resources for
Yeah.
all things 90s worship night.
You
So
know
very
what?
very grateful for him.
Awesome. What I'm so fascinated by is I just love the stories. Like people who have been there in the trenches and, met the people, and I just love hearing the stories. I mean, that's really what is unfolding through this whole series that we are doing together. And like you and we're just kind of we're like fans on the sideline. Just tell me more about how this all came to be. So I'm really excited to this. I think we should just go into it. Mike is standing by, and I'm looking forward to meeting him. So here we go. 90s Worship Podcast with Michael Coleman. Looking forward to it. Michael, welcome to our little podcast here. I think we're on episode 14. Oh, you know what? I just realized I forgot to change the episode number. I just changed your name. We're actually one more than whatever that screen just showed. So many stories, personalities, and people. But you're a highlight for sure. I'm so glad to meet you, Michael.
Nice to meet you too, Ryan. I feel like I
Yeah,
know you with all the things that Integrity Music did with Praise
I
Charts.
know. I know. I feel like you and we just have to have a little storytelling right now. So I'm just going to give me like a couple, I don't know, few seconds to give my intro to you, because it's true that we've never really talked a lot directly, if at all. I'm sorry if I'm not remembering in person, but you're just always been that name that I have heard about. And certainly I want to tell you, Michael, that many people that I tell about the beginning of Praise Charts, and I talk about how Integrity Music was the first company that I called. I called many trying to get permission to do this little thing that I wanted to do. And Integrity was definitely the one, the only, and the first that was like, all right, we'll give you a chance at this. And so I worked with many of your people back in that day. We're talking literally 1997, 1998. And then just another little side story is about 7 years later, I joined the Church Music Publishers Association. I'm sure that you are familiar with that
Oh yeah.
organization, and you were a big part of that. But do you know that the year that I showed up into that organization, which is all the executives from all the major music publishers, the Christian music publishers around the world come together for this. You were a big part of that. You stopped, your journey came to a transition, and then I came in. So we were like two ships passing. I
And
was there the year after you were gone. I'm so sad. So there you go. I'm sure
yeah,
many memories
oh,
would
many,
fill your mind.
oh yes, many memories. Many
Yes.
memories. We're
Yeah.
grateful for the journey.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the thing that I just wanted to begin by saying is I am aware for sure of the tremendous influence that you have had on Christian music, and I am reaping the benefits of that. I feel like I'm a bit of a fanboy of you, the organization that you made, the music, the heart that goes into Integrity Music. It still beats after um, much of that you invested into that. And so Chad and I, we just want to find out a little more about, what that era was like, your journey, and maybe even hear a little bit of where you're coming. But for those of you who are listening, it might be like, who is this guy that Ryan is fanboying over? Is Michael was the is it right, the president, founder of
Co-
Integrity Music, co-founder, right?
Co-founder and served as president for the first
Yeah,
24 years.
for the first 24 years. And certainly, uh, of all the companies out there, Integrity had a very, very significant impact on the lifeblood, the entire genre of modern worship really started with you. So I wonder if maybe you could just take us into the early days. I mean, we're talking days of cassette tapes, and songs were being written. And I mean, we've talked to people like, we had Don Moen on this show, and Paul Baloche, a few others. These guys talk about writing songs. They had no idea people were even interested in them or singing them, or it was like you stumbled into this rushing river. Could you take us a little bit into that early year? I would love to hear a few stories, whatever you've got. I want to hear how things were birthed in those days.
Well, thank you for having me, both of you, and it's good to see you, Chad.
Yeah.
Uh, my journey, I'm a drummer. Most people don't know that.
Huh.
And so before Integrity Music ever started, I had actually recorded 3 albums, and one of them was with a man named Pete Sanchez, and he wrote the
Yes.
song
I
"Exalt Thee."
exalt thee. Yes.
So I was actually the executive producer and drummer on the album where he premiered that song. Called That album was called "It Filled the Land."
Yeah.
I also had done a recording with a man named Garrett Gustafson.
Mm-hmm.
And Garrett uh, made a major contribution in the birth of Integrity Music. So what happened was we had a magazine we were publishing, and I met a man named Ed Lindquist, who's the co-founder of Integrity Music,
Mm-hmm.
and he was helping me with the development of the magazine and reaching more people. And as we were working together, we began to see a need for teaching on praise and worship in the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had met a man named Terry Law, who Don Moen worked with in a ministry called Living Sound.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd worked together many years. And Don came to Mobile, Alabama, where we started. And he was leading worship, just had begun leading worship. I mean, just at the beginning, coming out of contemporary Christian music and traveling in missions. Um, Terry had a real encounter with God and was doing some teaching on praise and worship in this meeting that Ed and I were in. And I believe Garrett was there as well. Excuse me. So what happened is Don started singing and playing at this upright piano. I mean, you talk about underproduced.
Yeah.
It was underproduced.
Yeah.
And as he began to sing, the presence of God just began to fill the room.
Yeah.
And it was very, very, very special.
Huh.
So we went to Terry Law and said, Terry, we would like to run articles in our magazine on praise and worship. So we ran 3 articles in the magazine. The magazine went to 55,000 people in 100 countries.
Yeah.
And when we ran the articles, there was an explosion of interest. We continued to talk with Don. And excuse me, Ed and I were already working on an idea of how to create praise and worship music that could be sent out every other month to this magazine audience, because there was a lot of hunger being demonstrated.
Yeah.
So we started Hosanna Music July 10th, 1985. And we never got into it to start a record label or a music company or be a song publisher or anything. We got into it with a desire to help people experience the manifest presence of God.
Yeah.
And that was our mission statement. It actually grew into helping people worldwide experience the manifest presence of God. And so what happened is we were going to start by finding great worshiping churches, licensing their master, putting it through our direct mail club, and then if anybody wanted extra copies, we'd refer them back to the church.
Yeah.
So we thought, we might have 4,000 people sign up. And so the first album, we were doing it every other month, which people told us, you're crazy. You're not going to be able to keep up with all of that.
Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of things we did that people said you couldn't do.
Yeah.
We both Ed and I and our team, we didn't know what we were supposed to do with music business, so we didn't know what we couldn't do.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So as a result, we launched this club, and we found a man named Tom Brooks, who was at Grace World Outreach in St. Louis, and we listened to the worship album that they had done that Ron Tucker and Carl and Albrecht were involved with as well, called Behold His Majesty. And we licensed that. And then the next album we licensed was by John Sellers. So we launched, we think we might have 4,000 people sign up that are going to get a new cassette every other month. So that'd be 6 a year. Instead, we had like 6,000, then it grew to 8,000, and by the time we were ready for the third album, we had 12,000 people.
Wow.
Every other month. The problem was we didn't have a third album. We couldn't find an album that captured the presence and the anointing of God and real great worship where people would encounter the Lord. We couldn't find that, and one that had great professional excellence.
Yeah.
So we went back to Tom Brooks and said, Tom, we have 60 days before we put the next album out. We don't have one.
Help.
Can we do one with you?
Yeah.
And that album was All Hail King Jesus.
Yeah.
And from there, so to speak, the rest is history. Tom worked with full time for many years, producing Hosanna music, and there are many other things that happened after that. But so Garrett Gustafson was involved and very much in the song part of it. Tom Brooks was an integral part. And then a little bit later, in talking with Don Moen, I told Don, I said, Don, I really feel like God's put it in my heart to help build a platform under your ministry. And boy, did God ever do that. So the initial creative team was Garrett Gustafson, Ed Lindquist, Tom Brooks, and I, and then Don.
Yeah.
And we would meet every 2 months in St. Louis, where Tom lived at the time. And man, we had some amazing, I would tell the guys, I said, look, we have no business telling everybody else they ought to worship if we don't.
Right.
So the first thing we would do when we would gather was we would worship.
Huh.
And many, many albums were born out of that environment. So that's a quick summary.
So many names that you have mentioned, many I'm sure that listeners might not recognize, but when you're like on the inside of this world and you sort of, if you read the liner notes of some of these cassette tapes, or if you pull out, the CD booklet and you read and you're like, oh, that's that person. And there, these are these threads that keep weaving through all of this. What about if we could just touch some high points of some names, maybe some people that would recognize some of the artists that you were able to feature through, just to kind of give us a bit of a context. I know you've said Don Moen, which many of us will be familiar with him. Certainly Paul Baloche. Now I don't know if these are people who are in order, but I'm just calling out some names of Daryl Evans. There was Trading My Sorrows, all of that. There was Darlene Jeck in the whole Hillsong world. Could you think of some others? Let's just like throw out some names of people who were some of the impacting voices of that day.
Ron Canoli would be a major
Yes.
contributor. Alvin
Yeah.
Slaughter, Paul
Yes.
Wilbur, who
Yes.
made a major contribution as a worship leader and songwriter.
Yeah.
Uh, Paul Balash, who you've named, we worked with him first as a songwriter on a
Yeah.
series we did called Scripture Memory Songs, where the
Yeah.
songs were literally word scripture.
Because
then,
it was Rita. Rita was the star of their little family, right?
yeah, they did a lot together, and we did a live recording with Paul, and
Yeah.
Paul's a good friend, and so he touched a lot of people. Later, we recorded Brian Dirksen.
Yes.
We recorded Darlene Check. In fact, over my shoulder is a gold album of her leading the album "Shout to the Lord."
Yeah.
And she was not even scheduled to be the worship leader on that project. Some things happened by the time our team landed in Sydney, and she was asked to lead worship. And God used that to revolutionize worship in so many different ways. So
Yes.
Integrity Music distributed Hillsong for 14 years. We were the
Yes.
first distributor of their music in the United
Yes.
States.
Yeah.
Alvin Slaughter is another worship leader that we work with. Bob Fitz
Right.
is another. We had, oh man, there were so many. I mean,
Kent Henry. I went to a Kent Henry worship seminar here in Vancouver.
Yeah, Kent
Yeah.
was one of the very first worship leaders, and Kent has been a major pioneer
Mm-hmm.
for worship and the presence of God being experienced. He is really
Mm-hmm.
been out on the leading edge.
Yeah.
Lamar Boston was a worship leader we recorded
Yes.
early on.
Yeah.
Of course, Pete Sanchez, we recorded him.
Do you know, like, because we're starting to we're working on an album project right now in PraiseCharts that we're calling Rewind, and we're slowly making our way through some of the great songs that were written in these early eras, and I Exalt Thee is definitely one of those. I just feel like I would love to see a fresh remake of that song, and just incredibly powerful memories of worshiping church with that song in particular. So
Yeah,
hey.
and that song is still being sung all over the world.
Yes.
I was in Armenia, of course, it's been quite a few years back, and they were singing it. I've been in some other settings. They're singing it. So that song has traveled far
Yeah.
and wide.
Yeah.
We also launched a number of Spanish and Portuguese worship leaders. Christine de Clario, who's now
Yeah.
very popular,
Yeah.
was with Integrity, and there were others. We had the privilege of recording Marcos Witt, working with him in a collaborative way.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm sitting here trying to remember.
Yeah.
It was literally hundreds of people over the 24 years.
So amazing. I feel
Robin,
like
Robin Mark.
Robin Mark.
Mark.
Can't forget him.
Yeah, Robin. I was actually on vacation in Hawaii, driving with my family, listening to some Irish music,
Yeah.
and the Lord, I didn't hear it audibly, but the Lord spoke to me and said, "Send somebody to Northern Ireland. I'm doing something special. I want you to find out."
Yeah.
So I called back and I said, "We need to get somebody over in Northern Ireland." And so Steve Merkel went, and he met Robin Mark,
Mm-hmm.
and then the first album was Revival in Belfast.
Yeah. And that song Days of Elijah that just really, really took off. But there were a number of significant songs that came from that album in particular. You know, I have memories because I was a young worship leader in those days, and young worship pastor, and I would go drive my car to some cul-de-sac just to have like my own quiet moments, and I'd stick a CD in and turn the heat up on full in my car and just let it run and lean my seat back, and then I can remember put on the garments of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Like that's how that project yeah, and so many songs like that. Days of Elijah, oh, Jesus, all for Jesus. I mean, I just wish that people listening could know. You probably don't even know some of these songs, or maybe some of you do, but I feel an incredible sense of honor and respect for the people that paved the way in that whole era. And I think that the next question we want to ask you now is like what has carried through? What do you see, has carried through, and maybe what do you sometimes look at in our 2020s modern worship and think, oh man, if we could get back to some of the roots, what are your thoughts there? Let's look at that from both sides. What are you grateful for that has persisted through? Let's start with that.
Well, one of the things that I'm very aware of is anytime God gives you the ability to touch others, you're standing on somebody else's shoulders that came before you.
Yeah.
And in our case, people can see Integrity Music and think, wow, that was amazing. And it was. It was like riding a 50-foot tsunami wave for years, the power and move of the Spirit that was going on all over the world. David and Dale Garrett in New Zealand were very instrumental in starting contemporary / modern praise and worship with scripture and song. Many people don't know about them, but they are a key fountainhead of pioneering modern worship. And then, of course, there were other ministries as well that went before us. As Integrity Music grew, one of the things that began to happen is back in those days, back in the 90s, you used to have worship music, Vineyard, Maranatha, Integrity, and contemporary Christian music. And they were two different things.
Right. Yeah.
And most of the music being produced for contemporary Christian music was from labels in the Nashville arena. And Maranatha was out in Southern California, and Vineyard was there, and we were in Mobile, Alabama, where most big record companies are. We were. I would tell people we actually are. They say, "Where are you based?" I said, "We're based in L.A." They would look at me like, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, it's just in our case, it means Lower Alabama, not Los Angeles."
Yes.
So what began to happen, Ryan, is as the 90s progressed, worship became a thing in Christian music. And I remember Twyla Paris becoming very, very popular artist in those years. She came to visit us in Mobile, and she looked at us in a meeting one day and said, "You guys were doing worship when worship wasn't cool."
Right. Yeah.
Well, in the late 90s, worship became cool. And so you started seeing artists do worship, which I'm for. I'm not against that.
No.
There were some artists like Michael W. Smith that were truly worshipers, and it was coming up out of the fountainhead of who they are.
Yeah.
There were others that were doing it sell records.
Yeah.
So as that progressed, we began to see more of a performance orientation enter the picture. And what began to happen was what was built to be a congregational participatory experience where the model in the Western church is kind of built on a Greek theater model, which is the actors are on the stage, the audience are out in the seats, and anybody prompting is on the side of the stage prompting the actors. But the biblical model is the prompters are on the stage, the actors are out in the seats, and God is the audience.
Right.
And so that model of gathering around the Lord and being participatory began to be influenced by more, I would call it more, it wasn't as presence focused, it became more performance driven.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that's true of everybody. I'm not saying at all that being able to provide a great performance to the Lord is wrong. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But I found even in leading Integrity that there would be times where you could start drifting and you didn't even know you were.
Yeah.
Because you're caught up in the momentum. When you catch a 50-foot wave, there are times you're just like, I pray I can just stay on top of this board and not get wiped out. And so there were mistakes we made. There were times we got off course. But my desire today is to see a much greater emphasis on being presence focused.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the trends I've seen that has alarmed me is the way that sound is mixed today in live meetings. I live in the Dallas area, and I've been in a number of different kinds of worship events. And not all the time, but I would say a majority of the time in churches where I've been, it's mixed as a concert.
Yes.
It's not mixed where you can hear each other singing and you're participating together,
Right.
worship
Yeah.
the Lord.
Yeah.
Now that's very subtle
Yeah.
for some people, but I mean, even the dB levels that are used are like, I mean, I was in one major conference with thousands of people there, and I pulled out the dB level on my phone. It was 105.
Wow.
I mean, you know, you can't take much of that.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a manifestation of it. I do believe that of the people that are leading worship today, that are very popular, I know some of them, and their hearts are just pure as gold.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really encouraged me is what I see happening in Gen Z and younger. There's a hunger for authenticity there, and there's a real move of God going on in that generation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, thousands of college-age students being born again here in the United States through, like at the University of Kentucky. I was just reading today, there's 8,000 people gathered, and 2,000 people gave their life to the Lord.
Wow.
And then they get baptized in 30-degree weather.
Right there.
So when I go overseas, you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
What today?
Yeah.
Okay. So when God called me to do this, he wrote nations across my head and put it in my heart. He gave me Psalm 2. And one of the goals and vision of integrity was to help people worldwide experience the manifest presence of God. And that's why, I mean, we were privileged to see God carry our worship music into 166 countries. And we had offices in South Africa, the UK, Australia, Singapore. We had a Latin American office for Portuguese and Spanish. What happened is when I handed off integrity to David C. Cook and their ministry, and they're continuing it today, I went through a health crisis for about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't go into all the detail of that, but I'm a miracle. I'm a miracle I'm sitting here.
Mm-hmm.
I really am. God touched me and healed me in 2016. I began in 2018 to re-examine, well, what's going on in worship? Because I've been on the backside of the desert for years.
Mm-hmm.
And because of my health. What happened is I started looking at it that started alarming me is the model of worship today, Western music and English language is so popular, period, in any kind of music. And that's the same with worship. And Integrity Music's songs were translated in many different languages and are still being sung today. But here's what I found out, Ryan, through friends that I have in different nations. Like I have a friend in the middle of Russia, in the city of Perm. And he's the key worship leader of a 3,000 member association of churches, evangelical churches. And I asked him, I said, Sergey, how many of the songs that these churches are singing, how many of them were written in Russian by Russians that you guys are singing? He said 10%.
Mm-hmm.
I started with friends in the Arabic world, in Brazil, and I mean, I could sit here and name all these different situations.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I found out. There are exceptions to what I'm about to say, but here's what I found out. Of the songs that Jesus' body is singing around the world outside the English language world, 90% of the songs they're singing were written in English and then translated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at English language worship, coming back to your original question, it's kind of like an upside down pyramid. You have some key mega churches and some key worship leaders and songwriters that are the ones that are influencing the English language worship world and providing a lot of great content for God's people to sing. But it's coming out of our culture. It's coming out of our worldview. Then those songs are translated, and you have Iranians and Russians and others singing the song in their language. Well, they can touch God through that. The songs are anointed, they're powerful. But if you were fluent, if your first language was English, but you were still fluent in Spanish, and it came time for you to pray, which language would you pray in?
Mm-hmm.
You pray in English, because you don't want to have to be translating to God what you're thinking, because you're talking to God from your heart. Well, the same is true in worship. So I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I started a nonprofit organization called International Bridges of Worship.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're focused on, is helping worship leaders and songwriters and other people groups develop their own worship expression from their heart to God. And so we started with Persians, Iranians, and doing it's amazing some of the things the Lord's doing
Beautiful.
there. We're getting ready to do things in Africa. So I haven't retired.
Yeah.
I've been refired by God.
Refired. And, yes.
So that's sort of a big picture of, if you look at the history where worship was in the 90s, how performance began to affect it. Now you look at where language worship is and some of the trends there.
Yes.
My desire for that is that they be more presence focused.
Yeah.
And participatory.
Yeah.
And then there's this bigger global picture where, Revelation says every nation, kindred, tribe, and tongue is going to gather around the throne. I don't think they're going to be singing translated English language songs.
Probably not. Yeah. I have a thought as you've been speaking. I think it might be one of the more profound thoughts I have had in the last couple of months. I'm going to give myself that. I'm just going to share this with you here. I think there's no stopping the recorded worship industry. People are going to make music. Some of them do it for a living. They may do it for the money. They may do it for the, ministry. There might be mixed motives. Music is an industry. That's just the way it is. But this is my profound thought, is we need worship pastors who are local in local churches to, if they're going to sing those songs, we need worship pastors to translate that recorded inspiration into something that goes back to what you're saying. You said not the Greek model, but the biblical model. I feel quite passionate about this, that if I'm going to lead, if it's goodness to God or graves into gardens or I exalt thee, is like, am I thinking, how am I going to engage the church to feel like they're on stage? And just my big thought, I just want to say, if you're listening, whoever's listening, if you're a worship pastor, is it's on you. You're the leader in your local place, and we need you as much or more than we need all these recordings coming out. Somebody's got to translate this into real live leadership on a stage with your average musicians and your average choir and your average piano player standing in front of people and listening to, like, what are the decibels? Are people singing? Do I need to change the key? Do I need to adjust the arrangement? Do we need to sing the chorus again because they're really catching on? I mean, Spotify's not going to do that for you, right? I feel now, I'm starting to feel passionate about this, is because I'm a bit of a defender of I love Elevation songs and Hillsong and Bethel and whatever. I mean, they're great songwriters, and I love listening to the songs. But I don't get up on a Sunday morning and play Spotify for the church. And sorry for some of you who might have to do that, but we need people like breathing, living, touch me, feel me, and most of the time we're average to better than average musicians. We're not going to sound like the radio, but that's not what we need. I don't know. I just feel pretty passionate about that. What do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely right. Um,
Yeah.
if you look at, like, I was on the advisory board of CCLI a number of times, and Integrity
Mm-hmm.
was the first to put our songs there with Howard Drzezinski when he started it. And I remember being in one advisory board meeting, and they'd done research among the 155,000 plus churches that get surveyed. And one of the questions they would ask the worship leaders is, where do you get your songs for Sunday?
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw that the number one source had become Christian radio, I wanted to, I mean, I just wanted to fall out of my chair. I
Mm-hmm.
thought, because I know, because of leading integrity, I know the process of what music has to go through to get in the right setup to fit what
Right.
Christian radio is all about. And it's a
Right.
beautiful ministry, and it's great what Christian radio
Yes.
does.
Yes.
But if that is the criteria of what songs get considered for Sunday morning, it's like
Yeah.
those are two different audiences.
Totally.
Your people in your congregation may sing the songs because they heard it on the radio,
Yeah.
but to make it participatory where the worship is about the Lord,
Yeah.
and as you said, Ryan, it's focused on the congregation and where they are and taking them on
Yeah.
a journey. Those same songs can be super powerful in a
Yeah.
congregational setting. But I think it's important that worship leaders be the one that build a bridge to that.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I experienced this so many times. I just got out of, I was leading worship this morning for, I don't know, 30 men at a men's recovery center. And it was just me at the piano and a microphone. And like, there's no way I could have just replicated a radio cut to them of
Yeah.
any of the songs.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be off the table. I had
Mm-hmm.
to like know my context. And yes, I sang some great songs that are played on the radio. But and then last Sunday I led worship at my church. Now that's for like 800 people, and there's lights and sound and all that kind of stuff. But still, it's so funny because like at band practice we pulled out the track and we're like singing to the track, and then I'm like, guys, this isn't gonna work. This doesn't fit what we need to do here. Let's like can all the I just want the click so that we can remake this song for
Yeah.
what we need it to be on a Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And even as for me, as I'm leading PraiseCharts right now, we're investing huge investment into creating mechanisms so that ultimately people can take the music that we make available in PraiseCharts and morph it into what they can do on a Sunday morning. I feel quite passionate about that. Is like we need musicians who are committed to their local congregations, and it takes musicianship and a sensitivity to your
Yeah.
people, to the Lord, all of these kinds of things. And Brandon Lake can't do it for you, or Chris Brown, or Paul Baloche, or Don Moen, right? So, anyways, I really feel that heartbeat that I can tell comes from the early days of integrity, and you still have a message to bring even to this modern era. So,
Could I just
yeah,
mention something real quick, Ryan? Just
yeah,
for all the listeners, I just want to encourage you. You know, many of you are not full time in terms of worship ministry, and you've got a job and a family, and you got a lot going on in your life, and
mm-hmm,
it's a sacrifice to do what you do in your ministry. I just want to encourage you. You don't have to equate your ministry with what someone else is doing.
Yeah.
And I look at the life of David, one of the greatest worship leaders in history, and you read the Psalms and what he poured out his heart to God over. And he had an instrument sitting with sheep in a field.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the production. Now, later at the temple, he had all kinds of musicians in 24-hour praise. But what I'm trying to say is one size doesn't fit all. And I think it's really important that we not feel like we've got to fit into something. Each
Mm-hmm.
of you have been called by God to do something unique that's you. And that's where the life's going to be for the people.
Mm-hmm. So good. Chad, you've been standing by listening to us two chatting up a storm. I'm going to give you the final word because, I mean, I'm honoring you as well for starting this whole 90s worship thing, and you're the guy that is recognized. There's something special came out of this era, and you have gone out and helped to find these people. What are you hearing? What's your thoughts about this as we come to a close?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I just want to say Mike's one of my favorite people that I have met along this journey, and Mike's so grateful just for your partnership with what we're
Yeah.
doing, and it's been a bit of slow road to get this docu series out, but we finally are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So I think this spring, the ball's really going to get rolling on some distribution and continuing with some post production on that. And Ryan, thank you again so much for partnering on this podcast series, just so we can build a discussion around so many of these narrative points that
Yeah.
are just, in my opinion, very important to reflect upon with where we're at in today's culture.
Yeah. So good. All right. Well, Michael, I feel like I just scratched the surface, so maybe we'll have to have you back or something like that. But I just definitely want to say it's an honor to know you, and thank you for the deposit you've made. And I'll just put this pitch out as I'm interested in what you're doing around the nations. Maybe Praise Charts can come alongside of some of the work that you're doing there. We're definitely interested in helping the church, around the world sing their own songs as well, and so I hope that we can be
Yeah,
connected. That would be great.
thank you. I'd be happy to dialogue with you about that. And we're just pioneering again.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
if people are interested, they can go to ibow.org.
Oh
It's
wow.
International
Okay.
Original Worship
Yeah.
is the name of the ministry,
Okay.
but it's
Yeah.
ibow.org. And they can actually see a vision video there and see some of what we're beginning to do. And yeah, I mean, there's some amazing things God's doing in the nations.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, we will put a link to that in the show notes to this video. If you look below, it will be there. And it's an honor to support you in this new venture. I can tell, obviously, once you are an innovator, breaking new ground, it's like you can never stop doing that. So what you did in the early days with integrity, I mean, you're still the same guy. So you're just going to keep doing that, and sometimes it can be a little bit terrifying. I feel like I was that, and certainly Chad, you're that. With this whole 90s worship thing has been like a battleground just to get this whole concept to the surface. So here's three of us, we all have a little dream and we kind of converging together, but I'm sure many of you listening in can identify when you've got an idea, it's a little bit out of the box, and you don't know where the support's going to come or whatever, but this is what we do. We're creative people, right? And so I just want to encourage you to press on and keep dreaming and keep bushwhacking, if you want to call it that, blazing a trail, right? So, all right, Chad. Well, this has been great. Mike Coleman, thank you very much. Blessings to
Thank
you
you.
and your continued ministry. Wonderful stories. I hope that you have felt encouraged, inspired, if you're a worship leader or just a worshiper in your church. And hopefully through this episode, you'll just have a little broader perspective of the world, the garden out of which we've all grown. here we are in our modern days. So all the best to you all. Signing off. This is the 90s Worship Podcast.